Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to break down one of the most important events in modern history, the Second World War. We'll look at how this whole massive conflict got started, how it spread across the entire planet, and of course, how it finally ended.
So here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 5 main parts. First, how the world caught fire. Then, we'll look at that first unstoppable wave of Axis victories. After that, we'll see how the war went truly global. Then comes the turning point, when the tide finally began to shift. And last, we'll cover the final march to victory.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. How did a conflict of this scale even get started? Well, it all kicked off with one single aggressive move that basically set all of Europe ablaze. And boom, this is the date right here, September 1st, 1939. German forces pour across the border into Poland. This wasn't just any attack. It was designed from the ground up to be incredibly fast and totally overwhelming.
So, how did they do it so fast? Well, they had this brutal and effective new tactic called Blitzkrieg, which literally means lightning war. The idea was simple. Hit the enemy with everything you've got, airplanes, tanks, all at once, so fast that they can't even react. And in Poland, it worked perfectly. The Polish army was crushed in just a few weeks.
But then, something kind of weird happened. After Poland fell, everyone expected Britain and France to launch this massive counterattack on Germany. But they didn't. Instead, things on the Western Front went quiet. This strange, calm period became known as the Phony War.
That calm, as you can probably guess, didn't last long. It was really just the quiet before the storm. Next up, we're going to see how the Axis powers just unleashed this incredible wave of victories that made them look totally unstoppable.
Just look at this timeline. The speed of it all is just staggering. In just under 2 years, they conquered country after country. I mean, for anyone watching this unfold, it must have seemed like nothing could possibly stop them.
1940 was a real whirlwind of a year. Germany attacks France, completely outmaneuvering their main defenses. You have the miraculous evacuation of 350,000 soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk, but it wasn't enough to save France. And to make things worse, Italy joins the war on Germany's side. With France signing an armistice and General de Gaulle calling for resistance from outside the country, things looked really bad for the Allies.
So, by the middle of 1940, Great Britain was basically the last one standing. Hitler launched what's known as the Battle of Britain, a relentless bombing campaign designed to break the country's spirit. But the British people and their air force refused to give in, and this incredible act of defiance was really the first major crack in the German war machine.
Okay, so up to this point, you could say the war was mostly a European affair, but that was all about to change thanks to 2 huge game-changing events that would drag the entire world into the fight.
First up, Hitler makes what is arguably one of the biggest mistakes of the entire war. He tears up his non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and launches a gigantic invasion of Russia. This opened up the infamous Eastern Front, a horrifyingly brutal theater of war that would chew up millions of soldiers and resources.
And while all that's happening in Europe, about 6 months later and halfway across the world, Japan pulls off a devastating surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Their goal was to completely cripple the American Navy in one swift blow.
You know, Japan was hoping to knock the U.S. out of the fight before it even started. But it did the exact opposite. The attack on Pearl Harbor united the American people overnight and brought the full industrial power of the United States into the war. Now it was officially a world war.
So, for a solid 2 years, it really seemed like the Axis powers just couldn't lose. But this is where the whole story starts to flip. We're at the climax now, the moment where the tide finally begins to turn, and the Allies claw their way back into the fight.
Now, the comeback didn't happen in just one big moment. It was really a series of 3 incredibly important Allied victories, all happening on 3 totally different continents that broke the Axis momentum for good.
Let's quickly break those down. In the Pacific, the Battle of Midway was a huge naval victory that crippled the Japanese fleet. In North Africa, the British won at El Alamein, saving the Suez Canal and vital oil supplies. But the big one, the absolute game-changer, was Stalingrad. The German defeat there was so catastrophic that it marked the beginning of the end for them on the Eastern Front.
So the tide has turned. The Allies have the momentum. Now it's time for the final push. This last phase of the war is all about a massive, coordinated assault from all sides, with one single goal in mind: unconditional victory.
This date right here is probably one of the most famous in all of history. It's D-Day. This was the largest seaborne invasion ever attempted, with Allied forces hitting the beaches of Normandy and France to open up a brand new front against Germany in the West. And the D-Day landings worked. It was like opening a floodgate. The Allies established a foothold, poured in troops and supplies, and began the fight to liberate France. From there, it was a slow, hard push towards Germany itself, all while the Soviets were doing the same thing, closing in from the east.
Being squeezed from both sides, the Nazi regime finally crumbled. With Soviet troops entering Berlin, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. Just a few days later, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe was finally over.
But even with Europe free, the war wasn't over. Not yet. In the Pacific, the Japanese military was determined to fight to the last man. The U.S. was facing the prospect of a brutal, bloody invasion of Japan that could cost millions of lives. So the new American president, Harry Truman, made a historic and terrible decision: to use a brand new weapon he hoped would force a surrender.
What happened next unfolded with incredible and terrifying speed. On August 6th, the first atomic bomb fell on the city of Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, a second one was dropped on Nagasaki. Faced with that level of destruction, Japan's government finally capitulated on August 15th, bringing the Second World War to its final end.
And with that, the single deadliest conflict in human history was over. But its end wasn't just an end. It was a new beginning. It completely redrew the map, shifted global power, and changed technology forever. Which really leaves us with one last big question to think about. How do the echoes of 1945 still shape the world that you and I live in today?